Hello everyone, I'm James Moore, your host for today, and a warm welcome to this CIPS download webinar. Thank you for joining us. And happy Earth Day if you weren't aware. This year's Earth Day theme is Our Power, Our Planet, and I think it's a really helpful one to bear in mind throughout this session today. Procurement and supply chain professionals really do sit in a position to drive impact and change with sustainable action. We have partnered with the team at Procurability to put on this session today, so a big thank you to them. And we've got a really fantastic panel from all over the world who I will introduce shortly. We're going to hear from our speakers on the growing interconnectivity between supply chain resilience, collaboration, and sustainability. And we'll attempt to unravel the links between these phrases in a world where the rules feel like they're sort of shifting before our very eyes on supply chains and supply relationships. And we'll address why sustainability really sits at the heart of value creation and resilience, all the while extracting some practical ideas and examples from our speakers so that you can come away with some ideas of how to do this in your own roles. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes for you, and then we'll crack on. So you can opt to watch us in full screen if you'd like to, but please note you'll just need to minimize to use the Q&A function. You should find that Q&A box just below me in the video player. Please do use it, share your perspectives, share your thoughts, your comments, but also share your questions, and we'll try to embed them throughout the webinar today. We've got lots on the agenda. I'll bring as many questions in as I can as possible, but there's no slides today. It's all panel discussion, so looking forward to a great conversation. CIPS members can claim 1 hour's CPD for watching this webinar today. You can just log that in your My Learning account as you would do any other CPD, so I'd absolutely encourage you to do so. And this session is being recorded and will be available to watch back on demand. So if you have any internet connection issues or your boss suddenly wants to call you, don't worry, you can jump off, answer the phone and come back, or you can watch back on demand afterwards. And I'd encourage you to share with colleagues as well after the session. But that's all the housekeeping. We'll get going. And as I said, we've got a really brilliant panel today joining us, offering lots of perspectives with some real sustainability expertise on this CIPS Earth Day webinar. Save us a little time and so we can get into the conversation a little more quickly. I'll do some quick introductions, but I encourage the speakers, if you want to add anything I may have missed when I first bring you in, please feel free to do so. So first up, we have Darshan Deshmukh with a background in tech and operations delivery. Darshan spent a decade in a series of global leadership positions prior to his current role of President of Procurability, including in IBM's integrated supply chain organization. Big thank you to Darshan and the team for helping to facilitate today's session. So welcome, Darshan. I'm also delighted to welcome Maxfield Weiss, Global Head of Sustainability at CIPS. A recognised expert in sustainability standards with over a decade of experience with the Global Sustainability Disclosure Not-for-Profit, CDP, as well as creating the world's first science-based supplier engagement target during his time at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. And we have Aparna Prabhakar, Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer for Energy Management at Schneider Electric, the very well-known global specialist and manufacturer in energy management systems. And also, according to Times Magazine, the world's most sustainable company. So perfect to have on with us in Earth Day, and a great background you've got there, Aparna, to be in with the theme. Aparna sits in a very influential role, leading strategy and sustainability for over $32 billion worth of Schneider's portfolio in energy management, and very much connects the dots of the delivery of sustainability targets in line with overall strategy and long-term direction. And last but by no means least, welcome to Christina Andrich, a Director of Sustainability Strategic Planning and Excellence at global packaging firm Tetra Pak. Christina holds the prestigious title of a previous CIPS Young Talent winner and has since moved from a procurement role into the central sustainability team at Tetra Pak. So I'm sure has experienced many of the challenges that those of you joining us today are facing. So welcome to you all. And I'd like to start by maybe setting the scene a little, and I'll ask Maxfield and Darshan to help me on this one as well. But I think what we're seeing in the world, as I mentioned earlier, and many believe it's sort of a fundamental reset of the global business landscape, and that has obvious repercussions for supply chains, and we're seeing that play out. I think terms like resilience, risk management, security of supply, these are now increasingly critical phrases that you're having to embed ever more so in your buying, sourcing and supply decisions. So disruption feels like the new normal, and what we hear time and time again, and we've done so on lots of recent CIPS webinars focusing on the unfortunate situation unfolding in the Middle East recently, is that strong collaborative relationships with your value chain, with your suppliers, but also with your internal stakeholders are really key to resilient supply chains. And sustainability, I think, is a core lever that procurement can pull to develop relationships, build collaboration and innovation, and also drive resilience. Be it with stakeholders in the business, as I said, or with suppliers to get long-term value-adding resilient outcomes. But I'll pass over to the experts for their perspectives here. Maxfield and Darshan, I'd like to offer you both the chance to kind of frame this line of thought that I've just set out. I think especially if the growing role sustainability is playing in supply chain resilience with your own perspectives. Maxfield, if I can start with you, what's your perception of this?
Yeah, well, James, first, I have to start out by recognizing the moment, as did you. It's Earth Day today, right? And I can't think of a better way to celebrate it than being here with the CIPS community. So welcome, everyone. And I'd like to thank Procurability for bringing us together today. Because I think ultimately, if we look at it, procurement is the function that has a power to deliver net zero, to deliver a nature positive outcomes, to deliver real economic transformation at scale. And this is not theory, but through everyday decisions. And this is opportunity that's in front of us, because the conversation today is not about awareness anymore. It's about execution. And that's the idea that I'd like to frame the discussion that we're having today. What we often call sustainability is actually at the core of resilience, because what we're seeing, as you said, particularly in the Middle East, is this. Energy volatility. It's no longer contained in energy markets. It's transmitting directly into supply chain costs, in supplier stability, into margins. And carbon intensity is increasingly becoming a proxy for financial risk. Because the more fossil fuel dependent a supply chain is, the more exposed it is to those shocks. And I think if we really look at it, and this is an unfortunate statement to make, we've had this conversation before. We had COVID, Ukraine, and now in the Middle East. And each time we've talked about resilience, yet we remain structurally exposed to the same underlying risk. So I don't think it's not that we don't have the understanding of the problem. It's that most supply chains are still built around the problem itself. And I think this points to something deeper. The energy system itself is structurally fragile. And each shock, I think, is further exposing that more clearly. So when we talk about resilience, we need to shift the lens. Resilience isn't about buffering volatility. It's about reducing structural exposure. And that's where sustainability becomes very practical. It's not this far off thing, because renewables act as a hedge. They remove exposure to fuel markets, exposure to geopolitics, exposure to volatility, and they turning the energy volatility from a volatile cost into a predictable one. And that's what key. So we're moving from climate as a conversation to a risk conversation. It's not about this climate conversation more, it's about risk. So what I'd like to say is we're moving from decarbonization as sustainability to decarbonization as stability. And this is where procurement comes into play. We don't just manage costs, we manage exposure. Resilience isn't a response to the problem, it's a design problem. And the supply chains that will win will be the ones that are exposed to volatile energy. Those are the ones that are going to win that are least exposed to volatile energy.
Thank you. Really, really strong start, really strong points, and very apt for Earth Day. Darshan, we've worked together on developing the kind of plan for this session, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this interconnectivity between resilience or supply chain resilience, sustainable procurement, but also collaboration and value chain relationships. What's your perception?
Yeah, but this is an amazing starting point where we are kind of talking about sustainability and resilience at the same time. And because I think if I think about synthesizing like hundreds of conversations that I might have had in the last couple of months, there is this general feeling of uncertainty. So many organizations, whether it's supply chain, procurement leaders, they're kind of experiencing that anxiety of unknown, what's going to happen tomorrow. And as everybody is kind of scrambling to get ready for the surprise that's coming on our way tomorrow, the expectation is from all the CEOs and the senior leaders within the organization, the supply chain reacts as fast as they can. And when we think about resiliency and when we think about sustainability, those two elements together, there is like this general feeling that what tactical items that we need to make sure that we're ready for, to make sure that the lights are on, even in kind of times of uncertainty, or even if some disaster strikes, how are we going to tackle that? And then because of all these changes that are happening within the environment, there is this general change fatigue that these most organizations are going through, that kind of zone out all these risks, like thinking about how do I tackle some of these risks in the short run and also in the long run, right? What we're seeing as the conversation is, when you think about environmental or other aspects of sustainability, in the longer run, they don't change. The importance of maintaining sustainability might feel difficult in the current environment, but the organizations that are kind of choosing to part ways in the short term will be at disadvantage and will need to catch up soon if they keep like their eye off the ball for the long term. So it's not just about cost. It's not just about like short-term risks. It's about how do we operate in the longer run so that our future generations have safer, livable environment available. But then also this agenda is so politicized that the polarity of the political landscape also drives these conversations in a very different way based on the organization's needs. So as leaders, it's important that we keep the sustainability, resiliency in short-term and long-term perspective in hand. And that, I think, that's why I think this conversation is so apt at this point of time, that all the conversation we're having across the industries is driving this conversation. Okay, how do I focus on short term and how do I focus on long term? And let's make sure that we are ready for it.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think it's really important to say, you know, there's a short-term aspect here and a long-term aspect, and the resilience phrase, you know, and framing, I suppose, helps make it more of a long-term, you know, embed and perhaps helps those conversations looking further forward and the more strategic conversations. So I think to pick up on a couple of sort of fundamental elements that we've already discussed is that we're in a moment of change and uncertainty. The global supply chain status quo is a little bit in flux. AI and technology is changing how we work. I could go on, but Darshan, I know you feel that the traditional procurement model maybe needs to adapt to kind of keep up with all this. So to stay with you, firstly, what do you mean? What do we mean by traditional procurement models? And secondly, why do you think they might struggle in today's environment?
Yes, I think if we take like the functional view of procurement, traditionally procurement was considered a support function that helped in buying stuff, whether it's services, whether it's product. This is the organization that helped getting stuff for the organization. I think it was like cost of goods sold and being able to deliver the work, right? As many organizations thought procurement, if you think about strategic aspect of procurement organization, a lot of organizations thought strategic sourcing as the strategic activity. And what does it actually entail? It basically entails competitively bidding things out and create competition, drive value. And in most cases, it was cost savings, supply availability, quality product. But if you think about the relationships with the suppliers, it was still, and when I say suppliers, it's like the partners within the value chain, it was still very transactional in nature. If we remember, like we used to call suppliers vendors. Now, vendor relationship versus supplier relationship, that changed a little bit. And I think even suppliers are starting to feel like it's a little bit more transactional relationship when it comes to how we treat each other. And so we have to think about that extended relationship where procurement organization treats suppliers as a zero-sum game to capture value. I think those are old days. I think that's like a traditional way of squeezing value from the overall supply chain. In the truly globally integrated enterprise, this model is going to struggle because it's very transactional. It's not going to yield the results. To be successful in this environment, it's important to transition to this long-term partnership model where we think about shared risk, shared rewards. So when the environment changes, we have a way to actually react to that environment as kind of partners versus supplier-customer relationship as we go along.
That partnership praise, I think, is important there. We've talked before about this on other webinars. I remember one webinar in particular, a guest was speaking about how they engage their supply chain in getting scope 3 data and information, and instead of sort of just sending out a questionnaire with no explanation and just expecting this data to come in, they sort of approached the suppliers first and asked what they could help with. How can we help in pulling this information in? And I think it was a really nice way of thinking about how you can maybe approach these things differently and see it as a two-way street and as a relationship. Aparna, I'd love to bring you in here. You sit very much in a strategic role, and please feel free to add anything I might have missed from your introduction to your role. But I guess you sit at the fulcrum of both strategic objectives and leading operational teams. For you, what does good sort of strategic collaboration look like? That could be both within the business and then but also with your external stakeholders as well.
So before I answer that question, I think it's helpful if I kind of say, what does energy management mean? Because we just spoke about global constraints. We spoke about a few things. When we talk about energy management, we are talking about that invisible infrastructure of electrification, the backbone of how electricity actually flows from grid to plug. Think about it from UPS to cooling to software that actually manages your entire system, which is foundational for anything to operate. And when you think about the environment we are, it's very global. We just spoke about the geopolitical constraints. You have the technology constraints, which are hitting your data centers, utilities, all your buildings, which is where we operate very, very hard. And my job is actually exactly the theme of this conversation, to move from constraints and make that to more collaborative strategic approach, right? So I look around the corner to ensure that we are getting ready for future while we are delivering for the present. And this requires us to kind of think about the energy and supply chain, not just as cost to be managed, but ultimate constraints to the growth trajectory we are thinking about. And I think it's important to think about this. Strategy without collaboration is actually meaningless. And collaboration without a strategic insight, I think, is just a hobby. So when we think about, or at least when I think about it, and you have to do it in series of 3, right? So I'm going to give you 3 things where we think about it. First, at Schneider, at least, we don't run business as there's a business strategy and then there is a sustainability strategy. That is the reason why I have both the mandates on how do we actually build out the most sustainable products in the world, and what is the strategy roadmap for the future which we are setting up. It's one integrated approach. If you're not connecting the dots, you're not really leading strategically, you're just reporting. Secondly, it's really about co-ownership. And I think Darshan said it well. Initially, when the traditional procurement was very much, hey, you need to supply something. We have this list of products, let's go get it. I think it's no longer that case. I'll give you an example. We just released our Schneider Sustainability Impact Program, SSI targets for 2030. Those are super ambitious. We actually don't know how to get to them. We have an idea, they're super uncomfortable, and there's a reason behind it, right? But the reason why we are comfortable, why we think we can actually make a difference, is because they weren't designed by sustainability team alone. They were actually co-built with supply chain, sales, R&D. So this goals is a shared KPI with our supply chain leader. You don't actually need to drive alignment because we already have it. And the third one is really with our supplier ecosystem, or value chain, as we like to call it. We've actually moved from transactional to more of a transformational relationship. I'll give you 3 examples which can actually ground that. We had something which we are applying, which is called Zero Carbon Project. We actually said we are going to take our top 1,000 suppliers who we share with the rest of the industry and actually help them decarbonize. We just didn't go and tell them, hey, you need to get your carbon footprint down. As the most sustainable company, we actually have a history of like being on this journey for years, decades. So we coached them, we gave them tools, training, and we got our top 1,000 suppliers last year to get about 56% reduction in carbon intensity. I'm very proud of what team has achieved on that. The second thing which we have done is we are part of the program and we are the founding members of a program called Catalyze, where we are aggregating demand so that the suppliers can actually access renewable energy at scale, which is actually very hard to do when you're a small supplier somewhere else. So it allows you to have group thinking. And that is where I think when you're in procurement, it gets real. You're not just managing suppliers anymore. You're really shaping whether these collaborations actually happen. So if you were to take away one thing from all of that, is strategic collaboration needs to be about shared value at scale, where resiliency, efficiency, and I will argue sustainability is slightly different from that, but is in the same vein, reinforce each other and don't kind of stand aside.
Thank you. That's really interesting. Thank you for the insights into what Schneider are doing. I think what really stood out as well for me is driving innovation. So I've written some notes down here. Driving innovation and resilience with your supply chain as a partnership, that it's not just about building sort of short-term resilience, but also long-term capability, and therefore meaning you can grow as a business and grow the supply chain as well, and that's good for everyone, right? So I think that's really interesting. Thank you, Aparna. Christina, again, I'd love to kind of bring you in here. You know, what's your perspectives on? You know, you've spent time as a procurement practitioner. You're now in the sustainability team. What's your perspectives on how supplier relationship models are changing? And can you share any insight into how you build collaborative partnerships at Tetra Pak as well?
Thank you, James, and very nice to hear also Aparna and Dashran on the changes that they have contextualized very well, and that I will now exemplify, right? But it strongly resonated with me, this going deliberately beyond the alignment and then towards the shared value creation. Now, coming to the question, right? So from the supplier's perspective, definitely, I see that the relationship models are clearly evolving, if I put them like that, and moving from, as Darshan said, traditional and efficiency-driven supplier relationships to something that is much more collaborative and into the partnerships that are anchored in the outcomes, risk sharing, co-innovation, and so on. And at Tetra Pak, this shift is actually very strongly externalized in the way how we approach the innovation procurement, which is something I think relatively new that is coming up in the world of procurement, right? Where instead of specifying the solution up front that we need to go and buy, say, we frame the challenge, meaning be it that it's increased collection recycling rates or improving material recovery or anything similar. And then we invite the suppliers, recyclers, even municipalities to co-develop the solutions with us. And that is why I think a very good example concretely from Tetra Pak indeed is the collection recycling ecosystem work, where the progress really depends on the orchestration across the value chain rather than just bilateral relationships. And in the markets, for example, like Brazil or India, and even parts of Europe, what we do is that we partner with different waste collector cooperatives, recyclers, equipment suppliers, and even local authorities in order to strengthen the full value chain. Because, well, I don't know how much it's known, but actually the whole value chain for the collection recycling of the beverage carton is indeed non-existing, so we need to create it, and hence it really requires a very collaborative effort. And then, so what's critical then is that if I just put it as a bottom line for us, is that all of those partners that we have, including, as I said, some of which are our suppliers, that we don't treat them, as Darsan said, as vendors, but rather as innovation partners with complementary capabilities. So we build something together, right? And that, of course, requires transparency, trust, and the willingness to evolve our governance models as the relationship matures, right? So moving from the contracts to manage risk and quid pro quo of the relationship with the vendor to something that is called a partnership and that truly enables the progress. So in my view, that evolution from relationships to true partnership is actually what enables both the strategic impact and the operational excellence at scale.
Thank you. Yeah, great to have your insight as well. And again, that partnership phrase keeps coming through, and innovation phrase keeps coming through as well. And the way to push these goals forward, I suppose. And Maxfield, I'd love to hear your perspective here. Is the innovation that's going on from a procurement perspective and sustainability perspective is so important to collaborate with your suppliers. I guess everybody's on the journey together. Is that what sort of shared value creation looks like to you when we think about supply chain relationships, Maxfield?
Yeah, and I think, let me put it from a provocation perspective, because too often we put this collaboration perspective in terms of negotiating price. And if you're thinking about negotiating price, it's not collaboration, it's optimization, because what we're really assessing here is a fundamental shift. I think true collaboration today is about co-creating value, as we've talked about throughout the system, not extracting it at a single point. And we've known for a while that there's no limit to price. So I think from my perspective, leading organizations recognize that you can unlock the next wave of value you can't unlock the next wave of value by squeezing suppliers. You unlock it by working with them. So what does that look like in practice? Ultimately, it means moving from transactional relationships to joint decision-making, to shared data, co-investment, have we spoken about, because the biggest opportunities now sit between organizations, not within them. And this is where sustainability is accelerating that shift, because sustainable value chains don't just reduce impact, they drive growth, they drive resilience and innovation, as we talked about. And collaboration, I think, is that mechanism that makes all of that possible. And we're seeing this very clearly in some examples. Companies are sharing emissions data across the value chain, co-developing low carbon products, aligning on long-term supply security, because no single company can solve these challenges alone, right? These are global environmental challenges. These are social challenges. And I think this idea of radical collaboration across the ecosystem is the only play that we have. So I think if I would put it into my three, as Prathana so eloquently put it, I'd say that organizations that are getting this right are doing three things differently. They're, one, aligning incentives across the value chain. So for shared outcomes like resilience, decarbonization, or innovation, as we've all stressed. They're aligning in investing in transparency and data, because to turn sustainability into a performance lever, you need that underlying basis of data. And three, I think they're treating suppliers as strategic partners, not as vendors, because the future of value creation, it sits upstream. So if I would put this from a CIPS perspective, this is exactly, I think, where the profession is heading. From procurement being no longer about managing transactions to being an orchestration of ecosystems. And I think that requires a different mindset that goes from competition to competition from within value chains to competitiveness of the value chain itself. So I'd summarize it like this. We had an old model, right? We talked about the old model, and that was to negotiate hard, manage risk, drive costs. But this new model is to collaborate deeply, share value, and design resilience together, because in a world of disruption, as we're talking about today, you don't compete as a company anymore. You compete as a value chain.
I'm going to struggle to do summaries at the end of this session, because you're all summarizing your points so well. So really, you're helping me do my job. It's very, very useful. Maxfield, you've come in to CIPS as Global Head of Sustainability relatively recently. And you've probably just sort of given that reason as to, why now is the right moment to put the foot on the accelerator, I guess, in seeing sustainability as a business resilience imperative. But I don't know if you've got any insight into what you're doing at CIPS and what we're doing at CIPS, I suppose, and how you're driving partnerships. For example, I know you're doing more work with the Sustainable Procurement Pledge, involved in the World Sustainability Day there. But any insight you can offer there?
Yeah, I think ultimately I've talked about this idea of radical collaboration, and it's going to take collaboration across the ecosystem. And what's amazing from the opportunity from a CIPS perspective is we have an opportunity from looking at the perspective of the global standard to look at sustainability as an achievement through, I think, procurement excellence. How can we take things and institutionalize them, scale them? And I think the question at heart is, how do we accelerate sustainability now? Why sustainability now? I think that's kind of at the heart of your question, because I think from my perspective, the context has fundamentally changed. I think sustainability is no longer a future issue. It's not about, it's now about current cost. It's about risk. It's about a resilience issue. It's access to capital. It's business competitiveness. We're now operating beyond planetary limits, and that's showing up directly in supply chains, in volatility and disruption and cost. And I think the signal from the market is quite clear. We recently released the Global State of Procurement and Supply report, and we found that 93% of procurement leaders say sustainability is growing or stable in importance. And there's this message out here that there's this pullback and ESG. But I would say that ESG is not going away. It's having a recalibration moment. What we're seeing is a shift from sustainability as ambition to sustainability as execution. So we're going from narrative to decision, from reporting to performance. And I think the question is, why now? I think the external world is forcing this alignment. We're having regulations accelerating. We're having risk increasing, as we're talking about today, and cost is becoming much more volatile. So I put it very simply. The question is no longer why sustainability, and this is why we need to act as CIPS. It's whether your business model is actually built for the constraints of the real world. And I'd say sustainable procurement is a catalyst of that.
Aparna, we mentioned earlier, Schneider Electric, very well known, very well regarded for your sustainability efforts, and thank you for sharing some of the things you're doing going forward. And sounds like those 2030 targets are ambitious and scary, but exciting at the same time. You're doing this with a backdrop of a lot of other pressures. We've already mentioned some of the scaling back. We've seen, I think you're based in the US on the green agenda. Why does Schneider Electric place such value on sustainability as a driver of value, and how do you sort of embed those principles in everything that you do?
So, needless to say, I think it's important to kind of highlight, we started this journey earlier than most, fundamentally because we believe energy efficiency, electrification, digitization are core drivers of progress. And that belief actually continues to shape our strategy. So we started actually on this journey about 20 years ago. And everyone in our company has actually a stake. So there are about more than 80,000 Schneider employees where sustainability metrics is tied to their compensation. It's tied to my compensation. And when it's on your paycheck, it actually stops being a conversation and starts really being about how do we actually execute on it. There are a few things which we do, and I think it's important to understand there are two hats within my sustainability team we look at. One is how do we actually drive our own footprint? How do we think about our own products? And the second thing is how do we actually now take that further and work with our clients? And I think there is a lot of ownership which we take on making sure it's our supply chain, but also actually helping our clients who we become a part of their supply chain. So first, we actually engineer sustainability into what we design from products and solution parts. So we have standard processes of designing and we use ecosystem. Our teams are expected to reduce environmental footprint of our offers. A great example of this is one of our products, GVXL, a 3-phase uninterrupted power supply, which actually is 99% efficient, has about 70% space savings. And we actually started design with saying, how can we actually get to those metrics? It's really from a data, and it goes into a data center. And when a data center operator looks at it, they're like, okay, this is more efficient, it offers space saving, and it's more revenue per square footage. It's win-win from that perspective. Then when it comes to adapting language, we are not changing our ambition. And I was at BNEF summit yesterday, Bloomberg's NEF summit yesterday in New York City. And we had a lot of conversation around, let's make sure we are not confusing sustainable solutions with sustainability jargon. And I think, Maxfield, you said this. We really have to stop having sustainability as a climate conversation and really start thinking about it as a risk conversation, because even though you think about the conversation in US right now, right? It's about resiliency, energy security, efficiency. But the solution, electrification, digitization, efficiency, is exactly the same. So we should continue to deliver this irrespective of whether it's labeled green or something else. That is what it is about. And the fourth one, I said 3 things, right? I said, hey, it's been a part of our DNA. We have incentivized it. It's how we engineer our products, even how our design processes work is with sustainability in mind. And yes, we are pragmatic. We are not going to go in and push on the jargon, but what we are pushing on is ambition. Then, and that's all internal facing. Then there is a question on how do you actually drive this from a client perspective, right? I'll give you an example. A growing number of companies which are our clients, Walmart, IKEA, Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, have all incorporated Scope 3 criteria into their supply requirements. Some of them are actually very significant. Microsoft, Meta have set demanding requirements on embedded carbon reduction. So if they ask to cut embodied carbon by 55%, that's not optional. It's really your license to operate. So we work with them on our supply chain, but we actually also work with them to say, what are the tools, what are the capabilities we have developed internally, which they can then pass on to their supply chain? How do we collaborate with them? And the fifth one, which is external, is more around the deeper supplier engagement. And I spoke about Zero Carbon Project. I love that project, right? I think it's really cool, but it wasn't really where I spoke that we were able to reduce 56% of operational carbon intensity of our top 1,000 suppliers. But I can tell you this was not a smooth journey. When we decided to do that and we said we'll get to this goal by 2025, everybody thought it was not possible. About 70 to 80% of the suppliers were just beginning their carbon reduction effort. And we had to give live trainings. About 200 site visits were done by the Schneider supply chain team, support teams, etc. And we really had to push hard, and hands-on support was provided to actually build credible decarbonization roadmap. So let's be honest. This takes effort. It takes strategic thought. And there are trade-offs. Darshan mentioned this. There is a short-term cost versus long-term resilience. And the companies which are going to win in long-term are the ones who try to stop avoiding those tensions and start engineering through them. So it's really, for us, it's about future-proofing our business in this new world, which is going to continue to be highly constrained. That's what we expect. is going to get more and more electrified and is going to be digital in nature.
Brilliant. And Darshana, I'm going to come back to you in a moment on sort of that question around balancing sustainability with everything else going on. So I'll come back to you. But Christina, just to we've had a great question in, and it was a question that sort of we were going to bring into the conversation anyway, was around some of the types of sustainability initiatives that you've delivered at Tetra Pak. But a good question for Mohammed, including, is there any examples of where it's helped manage risk, and particularly around supply chain disruption, or maybe future-proofing the supply chain from a resilience perspective? So I don't know if you can bring in any examples in there, or any additional examples, you've already brought some in, that can show both those elements.
Thank you, James, and definitely. And I love the question indeed about the risk, because sustainability work indeed is quite a lot about risk management, or in a way, a defense strategy for the company. However, I also want to invite everyone for the awareness that it's not only about a defense strategy, it is also a mechanism for us to drive the value creation, meaning more the offense strategies, right? So using it for the growth, for driving the sales increase and so on. And I think most of the initiatives indeed that I wanted to highlight just in the context of our conversation today are indeed about the value creation and the positioning of sustainability to drive it. So, and if I start with one that is the work that we did more on together with our, of course, colleagues from procurement is the work on the scenario-based modeling for understanding how confident are we that we are going to achieve the targets, and then making the data-driven decisions in that constellation, right? So I think it was a partner that mentioned that, if you have ambitious targets, however, provided that they are co-created and driven by the business, then the confidence, of course, should be more. However, for us really to wrap our brains around it, how confident are we, and where is it that we need to put a pedal on the gas, for accelerating a little bit more. We developed this model in order to see, okay, what are the different pathways towards the achievement of our sustainability targets. And then there we factored things such as risk, again, feasibility, environmental performance, investment implications, and so on. And then, of course, sustainability-wise, it supported us to see what is the progress towards the sustainability targets. But then on the other side, from the business perspective, what it helped us with is to reduce this strategic uncertainty towards how is it and how we're going to achieve it, if we're going to achieve it, and so on. It also helped us to see, okay, are we, or where should we allocate more capital or less, I wouldn't say that, but where is it that we should how to allocate our resources in the most efficient way, and also to ensure that any innovation investments are aligned with both the sustainability outcomes, but also the long-term competitiveness of the company. And then I know, James, you and I had a little bit of a conversation also prior to the session, and speaking about the cost aspect of that sometimes comes in contrast with sustainability solutions, right? A premium price and so on, and how the different procurement professionals might be looking at that one. And there I wanted to highlight indeed one initiative that we did. It was more looking at our customer operations or downstream value chain, but then you can always envision yourself being of course, being the customer that the procurement professionals indeed are, looking at our suppliers. And there what we really try to do is to see how is it that we can embed sustainability directly into how the value is created and delivered to our customers. And that means integrating it very deeply and making it an integral part of the product management, including both the deployment and development, but also in the value proposition of our customers. And there, I think one of the critical things that we managed to say get across to our customers, but also internally, is the integration of sustainability into the total cost of ownership. meaning that sustainability and TCO actually go hand in hand, as opposed to as frequently being perceived, right, in contrast with one another. And that, of course, is super important for our procurement teams across the world, who indeed wouldn't like to see a premium cost for something that is actually a sustainability benefit. So I think if I draw the line, the common denominator really across all of these initiatives was actually that sustainability must be treated as a strategic input and not something that is an afterthought, right? Oh, something happens and then, oh yes, we can or we should have integrated sustainability. But rather, if we fully and truly integrate sustainability, then it can act as a very powerful driver of value creation, rather than something that is a competing priority.
And I completely agree. And I think your point around it not just being seen as defensive, and I guess it's easy to think of it in that way at the moment with so much going on. It's resilience is really front of mind and managing those supply chain disruptions. But if you embed this long term, TCO, as you mentioned, is really critical here. You can think further ahead and sort of embed long-term resilience in everything you do. So thank you for the question, Mohammed. And Darshan, I'd like to come to you here and sort of follow that trend line of thought, because a great question from Isabella from the Rainforest Alliance. Great discussion so far. My question: how do you prioritize building long-term supplier network partnerships in a global volatile environment? From economic, environmental, and security that mandates flexibility of supply. So I guess it's Darshan, how do you prioritize those long-term supply network partnerships and sustainability when you've got everything else going on at the same time?
So it's going to be difficult to not repeat some of the themes that we just talked about, but I think I'll stay with the rule of three that Aparna now started. So I think the first one, we talked about this a little bit, but I think maybe very specific. When you put together the supplier relationship management program, the SRM program, with the extended value chain or extended supply chain, like tier 1, tier 2, tier N, however deep that you want to go as part of your relationships, focus on long-term and short-term incentives. So for example, when Aparna said we have a 2030 plan for sustainability for Schneider, how does that translate into the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supplier incentives for short-term and long-term? So that they can help support the objectives that Schneider has for next 4 or 5 years. And a lot of times people think about sustainability is expensive is because of the transition from the existing infrastructure to maybe new infrastructure. There is some capital investments upfront. But if you look at the overall total cost of ownership, I would say 8 out of 10 times, that's actually a false premise. I don't think it's expensive to have sustainable solution if you put the full life cycle of that solution in front of us. But I think all of us most of the companies are so focused on the short-term results and Wall Street. I think it's very difficult to kind of take that long-term view on both for your own results, but also the incentives that you are giving to your partners, right, as part of your value chain. So it's critical that you have those long-term, short-term incentives conversation with your partners all the way up to tier N that you are managing actively. So when things get tough, we're looking at it as a joint lens to optimize results. So it's not just like that game theory of, am I taking it from you, or am I kind of not sharing the information because I want to manage my own narrow landscape, right? So I think it's very critical that we do that view of extended supply chain versus individual organization. That's number one. Number two, I would say just looking at the transparency of data and risks across that value chain. So the next phase in that is, are you sharing the data as transparently as you could so that you can take that joint lens objectively, versus if you're just sharing partial data or not the right amount of data, or if you're gaming the system, so you're going to get the bullwhip effect in supply chain that we generally see, especially in the S&OP processes where it's a financial process where you go across the supply chain and you get this bullwhip effect of having the supply demand issue as you kind of go along, right? So that's very critical. Can you actually influence that extended supply chain when you are driving these initiatives across your value chain? Going beyond the self-governance, so like self-reporting, being able to, is it part of your day-to-day operation? So Maxwell just talked about it. Is like, it's not just about, oh, it's an aspirational, just fill in the checklist and then hope that it works. It's really part of your overall day-to-day operations, that it's expected as we kind of deliver the work. And as you can think about going beyond that self-governance, how do you integrate that to your day-to-day operations and relationships with your supply base? That's going to drive that as part of your DNA. And ultimately, I think change is the name of the game. I think things are going to change. Do you have systems, that is people, process, technology in place that can respond to those constraints as fast as you could? And if you can build that system around it that can respond to these changing dynamics external to your environment, can you actually improve your performance based on those constraints that are thrown at you as you kind of go along? So I think it's kind of these three pillars as you kind of think about how you can be ready for implementing your sustainability goals within the existing environments that could be very challenging for short term and also long term.
I suppose like any sort of transformation, it's and thinking differently, it's about a process shift as much as it is a mindset shift, right? It's, as you said earlier, Darshan, it's moving away from terms like suppliers and vendors, and I think Christina, you said this as well, but treating them as partners and collaborative sort of partnerships, and a partner, as you've shown, you're supporting the whole supply chain, smaller businesses as well, work towards the same goals, and embedding that in your overall strategy. So thank you for the correct questions. They've been great questions, and some of them have also been covered in what we're talking about as well. So really great to see them coming in. I want to think about just the future a little bit here, and what that looks like. And Aparna, I'd like to come to you on this. Many of the easy wins of sustainability are behind us. There's increasingly uncertain signals on the kind of original goals here. You've achieved a lot, Schneider Electric has so far, by the sounds of it, and you're also got ambitions ahead, by the sounds of it, for 2030. What do you feel fundamentally needs to change over the next 5 to 10 years to deliver impact at the scale that the world now requires?
So first of all, I want to just start with saying I'm optimistic that we can deliver, but I want to underscore that with urgency, right? Because the path ahead, and it again depends on where you are from your company's maturity on it. There are still a lot of things which are, I think, easy wins, which a lot of companies can do, or what we call product care abouts, which are good for the product, which are good for it's like win-win. But the next wave of impact is really about system change, not incremental change. And Darshan spoke about PPT, the people, processes, technology, and how you need to build system around these to actually design the future. So first, when you think about what is required for us to enable and move in this world of constraints, I think we have to shift from project mindset to a system scale deployment mindset. And that means that we need to actually start thinking about, and I am sorry I'm using the much word bingo here, but it's important because you can use AI as a force multiplier for efficiency and resiliency. You have to think about what is the inflection point, how do you apply the AI and create that exponential progress that helps you optimize some of the energy, materials, operations in real time and in life systems. Second, as this community, and I don't actually usually talk to this community, I think it's important for me to highlight that materials and circularity should become non-negotiable. Efficiency gains are getting harder. The questions really what you should be asking for is what are you building with? What are you how are you designing for reuse? Are you thinking about end of life? What happens? This has to be engineered into procurement right from the beginning and not treated as an afterthought. I think that's extremely important as we go into it. And we need to build differently from start. Let's take markets like India, Saudi Arabia, where the clean energy, and for whatever reason, is not really about retrofit. It's kind of foundation for them. And that's where we can see the economics and sustainability sort of align. The question for us in these fairly mature markets is, how do we actually build differently? How do we think about it? There's a lot of infrastructure build which is happening, a lot of manufacturing footprint which is coming up due to various technology aspirations. How do we set the foundations in our factories, in our supply chains, which is not a retrofit, it's just foundational. And the last thing which I would say is, it's really about ecosystem, right? We say this as Schneider. I like the saying, so I'll repeat it. We don't scale through headcount. We scale through ecosystem. We have over 1 million partners globally, and that's what we have been pushing, right? We have about 6,000 primary distributors. We have 6,000 strategic partner programs, and so on and so forth. But what we have really done is we've built them, and we share our strategy, we drive it, and that's how we are turning strategy into execution. So for us to be successful, and us in a grand sense, right? The next 1,000 days is going to actually define the next 30 years. And that will not be won by companies with best targets. The company which wins is going to be ones which have the best execution systems, which are sustainable, efficient, and resilient by design to begin with.
And I really love the way you start that with it's not easy, but let's be optimistic, and this is possible, and we can do this. And as an ecosystem, I think the ecosystem is a really strong phrasing of how to put this, and strategic partnerships within that ecosystem. I want to come on to summary statement. So just a quick question, if I can, for you, Maxfield. Because you've spoken before about value chain leadership. And again, thinking about the future here, and thinking about everything CIPS wants to do with the great conversation that we're looking to promote. What do you mean by value chain leadership, and particularly in the procurement perspective? Why is procurement in a position to sort of strategically drive a lot of this? And I'll actually ask Darshan if you can. I'll ask you to come onto this as well shortly afterwards. So if I can politely ask to keep it short, Maxfield, but what's your perception?
I'd say that value chain leadership is the next evolution of procurement. It's the shift from managing suppliers to shaping outcomes across the entire system, because what's changed here is a thought from value, risk, and sustainability no longer sitting within the organization. They sit across the value chain, as I said in the opening. And that fundamentally changes where leadership must happen. And at CIPS, we say this over and over again: sustainability will be delivered through procurement. And procurement must lead, because procurement sits at the point where decisions are made, suppliers are selected, and where trade-offs are managed. And we're seeing this as a structural shift. In the latest State of Procurement and Supply report, responsibility for sustainability is moving away from central ESG teams, and it's showing up in the procurement and supply chain function, doubling from last year. So procurement is no longer about managing costs. It's accountable for how organizations manage risk, create value, and deliver sustainability commitments. And in practice, I think that means three things: integrating cost, risk, and sustainability into a single view of value, designing supply chains that are structurally more resilient, and scaling impact through suppliers. And this is the shift that is going to happen across the value chain, from procurement as a function to procurement as a strategic control point for transformation.
Thank you. And Darshan, from a procurability perspective, what is your view? What is your perspective on the future, and how procurement played an integral role in managing risk through levers like the sustainability agenda?
So I think the team covered a lot of those points during the last hour, but I think I want to kind of maybe leave with one specific statement that our Chief Supply Chain Officer uses. I think if we want to achieve all these things that we want to achieve that we talked about, treat your supplier as if you would treat your customers. I think you want to just think about, like, for 10 seconds, like, what does that really mean? That's a very different way of treating your supply base And that's going to drive a very different ecosystem conversation that Aparna was talking about. That's going to drive a very different conversation about how the incentives look like. And that also going to like, are they going to actually help you drive innovation and give you the multiplier effect that you're looking for when you're driving your sustainability initiatives? So I would say, I think if you kind of start with that statement as a benchmark and then build a system around it, that will definitely drive a lot of like a change management internally within the organization and also drive significant results.
Fantastic. Thank you. Treat your suppliers like your customers. I love that. Christina, any final thoughts from you? What's your perspective to kind of that you'd like to leave people with?
Yeah, if I would choose one sentence to leave CIPS community with, it would be that, I mean, sustainable procurement is not about doing the right thing, right? It's more about securing, one, the long-term value as we spoke before, and then two is also the resilience for the business.
Thank you. Wise words from a previous procurement emerging talent leader of the year. So thank you very much. And Aparna, any final thoughts?
I wrote on my piece of paper, I make notes. I wrote, treat your supplier as your customers. I think I may have to frame this somewhere and put it somewhere. It is like the quote of the day in my mind. All I can say is we've covered this really well, but let's make some things non-negotiable on how we buy, how we think, and how we design. And let's not make, whether we call it efficiency, resiliency, sustainability, as an afterthought in our conversation, but let's have it right up front. And I think that shifts fundamentally how we think about it as well.
Thank you. I don't know if I can summarize better myself, but thank you for all the questions we've had in today. We've integrated lots of them into the discussion. So if I didn't read your name out directly, thank you. They did come through. A couple of great ones in there as well. Thank you for Procurability for supporting today's session. We really appreciate and facilitating something like this on Earth Day. It's really great to have you and to have Max Field as the new global head of sustainability for CIPS. It's really great to have you on one of our CIPS Download webinars. And of course, a huge thank you to Darshan, Christina, and Aparna for taking the time and for sharing your perspectives, but also your experiences and what you're doing. And I think that's really impressive and also really helpful for the community to hear. If I can summarize, it's hard to because you've all done it so well. I think taking a holistic view of all this, sustainability decisions are more and more forming part of a resilient strategy, and if they're very much two sides of the same coin, and I think that's an interesting shift in how the conversation is being framed from a kind of practical operational perspective, and how you speak to your C-suite, but also your team about embedding this kind of thinking within your function. And this offers new opportunities to get closer to your suppliers. We've had some great examples of co-innovation, partner ecosystems, and supplier relations. Not vendors, but partnerships. And treat your suppliers like your customers. I think there's no better way to leave everyone on Earth Day. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And I think this all feeds into what we're calling the great conversation at CIPS. And this is all about big talking points, future thinking, a worldwide dialogue about the future of the profession. Lots of elements coming through today. So keep your eyes peeled for more on this kind of campaign over the coming weeks. We'll be pushing lots of this throughout the year. Lots of ways to get involved as well in events, but also on webinars and on online as well. We're encouraging everyone to contribute, whether you're a CIPS member or you're not. So the future of sustainability and long-term resilience will definitely be a part of that. Before I go, we have 2 more webinars next week. The first of which is the exciting launch of this year's CIPS Global State of Procurement and Supply that Max Field mentioned a couple of times. We'll be talking through the results. Over 500 procurement and supply chain leaders responded to that survey. Some really interesting takeaways and heavily linked to today's discussion as well. We have Risk and Resilience Week coming up in early May, so 5 webinars across 3 days, so do join us for that. And do check out the training courses available from CIPS on sustainability and risk as well. There's 2 coming up in May, one in the UK, I think, and one in the Middle East and North Africa region. So do get involved and sign up for those. But that is enough for me. Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Thank you to our speakers, and thank you to Procurability. You'll shortly receive a follow-up email from this webinar to watch it back on demand. Please do share with your friends and colleagues. Aside from that, have a great rest of your day, everyone.